Welcome to the Region of Solution podcast, where we give you the insider's take on the impactful work and initiative being undertaken by ESCAP and its partner in Asia and the Pacific. I'm Sompot Supputhamongkhon.
And I'm Kavita Sukanandan. Welcome to another episode of our series. Today we are here to explore diversity, equity, and inclusion in practice. So everyone has needs at home and at work. Your needs could differ from mine, but that does not mean they are not valid. This is where a workplace built on embracing differences with mutual respect offers us an opportunity to do better. And it isn't just beneficial for employees, it's also good business.
Well, to break this down for us, today we have Haibin Zhou, founder and CEO of Easy Inclusion Consulting, and Tingting Chen from ESCAP Social Development Division. Welcome.
Hello, it's my pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
So, Haibin, let's start with you first. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey to founding Easy Inclusion?
Actually, I was born in rural places in Nantong City, which is part of Jiangsu. And then my family migrated to a northeast China city. My earlier childhood, I have the feeling that I'm different from the local people there. And sometimes I feel a little bit segregated. And this is my first feeling of how kind of discrimination, segregation will set in some feelings into you. And when in the universities, I have a chance to visit an NGO called Haibin International. They have some project in Sichuan province. This is my first time exposure to the real work of NGO and see how their wonderful work helping farmers to be empowered. So I made myself committed to the work of rural development. After that, I got a job as a journalist for 3 years. I write on political news. And then I study in Sydney on human rights. And I think that this is the right time that I go to empower real people. And then I find a job in International Labour Organization, empowerment projects through employment for people with disability in China. I worked in that project for 5 years. So the project finished, I want to still stay in this field and really help people with disability and business people to connect each other. I have other 5 shareholders, and they are very encouraging to me, and they support me to start this social enterprise. And I really love the work, what I'm doing.
Thank you, Haibin. And Tingting, what led you to this path and to the United Nations?
Yeah, I currently work in ESCAP as a social affairs officer, and I focus on disability inclusion and gender equality. Coincidentally, like Haibin, I was also trained in journalism, and I have to say I also got my very first inspirations about social inclusion in my training, where I was able to be exposed to many social issues, and especially the real people of different backgrounds who are facing challenges in one way or another. That's where I got my inspiration and also passion about working in social inclusion, and specifically to gender and disability. The more I work with these people on the ground, trying to solve the problems and challenges we're facing together with them, the more I find that inclusion is not just about these individuals belonging to the less privileged groups in the society. It's actually concerning every single one of us. I think that in a way sustain my passion and also keep me moving forward.
That's a very interesting journey. So we like to also ask all our guests on our podcast series this very same ice-breaking question. What solution are you bringing for the region?
So when we found Easy Inclusion, we find that there is emerging need from business to including people with disability in their workplaces. In 2016, the government changed the legislation on the quota system. So companies need to pay more if they don't employ people with disability. So at that time, we think this is a business case. And so we start consulting services and also linking them with disability applicants. But we find that there are a lot of more work for business to do before they start the inclusion journey. At least they need to build a culture that is inclusive to people with disability, and also their HR recruiting process should be accessible. And also when people are on board and also retained in the company, there are a lot of training services need to be. So we are evolving through the time. We grow up with the business as well. Through the process, we find that retaining is more important and more long-term rather than only the recruitment process. And also when we work with people with disability, we find that they have a lot of fear and not confident, especially through the interview process, onboarding process. There are a lot of challenging skill sets for them. So we find that both sides need to be learn from each other and also face to face to really learn from each other. That's why we start a platform and connecting both sides, business and disability. Give you one example, we have a mentorship program that companies can identify some volunteers. Most of them are from HR and core working functions. And those companies, when they mentoring one student with disability, one result coming from it's not only they helping people with disability, rather than they find that they learn a lot from students with disability, how they tackle their challenge in their daily life, and they will be more confident when they have a real people with disability working with their team. Now we have support more than 15 companies, more than 400 volunteers, and also more than 400 students with disability talking to each other on this platform. That is our approach.
Thanks, Haibin. And Tingting, how about you?
In Asia and the Pacific, we are supporting countries to implement global and regional frameworks for the rights of persons with disabilities. One of the priorities we have been working on is to make business value chains disability inclusive. We also invest a lot in bringing partners not just from the government, but also from the business sector, from academia, and more importantly, from the organizations of persons with disabilities, provide a platform for them to collaborate and work together in addressing relevant issues.
Okay, let's start with the fundamental concept of accessibility. How does a focus on accessibility and inclusive support involve all of us?
Yeah, recently I'm joining a conference called Service Design Conference. And I asked a professor, like, we have so many rules on buildings should be accessible, but when they really apply in real actions, we find that there is a gap between the personal needs and the building who really accessible to people. And he replied to me that we need a lot of the user experience designers to really help people really be included. But this is remind me that in China, we have more than 400 million people who are in need of accessibility. We have 85 million people with disability, and we have more than 290 million elderly people. For them, their needs are all similar. They need to go to the supermarket, to the hospital, or even to the public spaces. Then there will be a whole huge population who are in use of accessibility. For business, if you consider this is a business customers, you are facing a lot of potential needs. And if your business is accessible, you are really open your doors to all the customers. With business, you should really think in a business case. It's not a charity, it's for everyone. What do you think, Tingting?
Yeah, Haibin, I think you have answered that question pretty well. Just to build upon what you have already said, I think people could easily overlook the fact that every single one of us will need accessibility support in one way or another at some point in our life. Even if you're not yet an old person, or even if you just not live with disabilities, accessibility is not exclusively for persons with disabilities or older persons. For example, I'm seriously nearsighted, and I could barely read anything one arm away from my face without wearing glasses or contact lenses. And also, something else I like to add is that inclusion, it doesn't just affect every single one of us. It also has to involve all of us to build inclusion. Because having accessibility infrastructure is important, but more fundamental than that is the people who design the products, who deliver the services, people who do planning and make decisions, and all of us who are users, consumers of these infrastructure and services. We all need to embrace inclusion.
I find that when I work with business, they always neglect the fact that there are many people who are surface. They are not identified people with disability, but actually they have disability challenge. They have some barriers accessing to several places. If you don't retain those persons, it means that you have some barriers in your workplaces. And although you have some new employee with disability, you open the doors to them. But when they entering the workplaces and really working with other colleagues, those problems will go to the surface. That's why I would say retaining is more important than the recruitment, is that actually everyone in your team have the potential needs of accessible working places. If you build a workplaces accessible to all and you can retain them, your company branding will go mouth to mouth.
So Tingting, I understand that ESCAP has also worked on several strategies or core principles for inclusive businesses, or in particular disability inclusive businesses. Could you share a little bit more about that?
we've been working on disability inclusion for decades, and especially in recent years, disability inclusion in the business world has become one of our priorities for all the reasons we have discussed. It's no longer enough to just facilitate actions from the government or from the civil society. It's becoming even more and more important to also engage the business sector, given all the opportunities and potentials in our economy in this region. So in ESCAP, we have recently facilitated Asia Pacific governments to adopt what we call the Jakarta Declaration. That is a regional framework. In fact, a new generation of regional framework we have already had for decades. And under that, one of the priorities identified is disability inclusion in the business world. And of course, there are other priority areas like strengthening the laws, enabling meaningful participation of persons with disabilities, and also improving universal design-based accessibility both in physical and digital infrastructure. Other than that, specific to making business disability inclusive, there are a number of principles that are very fundamental, starting from changing the mindset. By that, I mean the mindset of business leadership, management, and also the workers and consumers to understand that number one is good business and number two, it's feasible, because there is a myth that how far we can go to be disability inclusive and how does that cost and why from the very beginning we should invest in that. That's why I think changing the mindset is the very important first step to do. And secondly, I do believe it's incredibly important to rely on knowledge from the disability community to identify opportunities of hiring and hiring from persons with disabilities, and to identify what needs to be done for businesses to become disability inclusive.
So what does it take for businesses to move into the direction of greater disability inclusion?
I find that if you meet a business manager who don't have the mindset, they always have 3 reasons they can start with the inclusion journey. First is always a moral request, or when you think about it, there are more than 1/4 of the workforce and population who will be disabled persons. So this is for your community. You need to respond to those kind of needs. I find that some of the business leaders or their relatives who are disabled, or their child, or they have a close friend who are disabled, this always gives them an impetus to really do something. The second one is always the legal requirement. There are many countries have a quota system or have discrimination law. So for them, they need to obey the rules and really employ people with disability. But sometimes I find managers have ways to avoid that. The third one, I think, is more powerful. They have business case to make your business to be inclusive. For example, if your hotels is accessible, you can have more than half of the population will choose your service rather than an inaccessible hotel. So when we work with business, we always say the business case will help you to be more competitive than your challengers. So this is something in real actions, we find that will make them more confident. Just last thing I want to add, when they start the action, I would suggest them to start with role models. For example, if you have one worker with disability who are doing something well, they should pass on the stories to other people who are not confident employing people with disability. This kind of positive energy and examples will reduce people's attitudes barriers.
Haibin has shared very interesting examples from real life business world, and I just like to add one more thing, which is digitalization and technologies nowadays have made many more solutions available that were beyond reach before. And I think that should be something we need to continue to unpack and discuss, that business and organizations working in disability inclusion understand what the options are. Maybe there are solutions and options that were unthinkable before, but nowadays could be used to break down the barriers in either for persons with disabilities to work or to participate in the economy in many different ways throughout the value chain. I think in addition to helping business to realize it's a good business case, it's also important to provide practical solutions.
You mentioned solutions, Tingting. So maybe the both of you could share what are some of the recent solutions that you've seen out there that just made you go, wow, I didn't think this was possible, but I'm so glad it's here.
Recently, I visited a technology company who provide sign language services to companies. I find that it's smart, it's remarkable. What they do is they will provide devices for the managers. So as soon as they find that they have an employee with hearing impair needs sign language, they can touch the button, and in the back they have an office that provide 24 hours sign language services. The company buy the package. After this is very time and economic efficient, rather than they really employ several sign language interpreters. But I think the technology make this communication possible.
I recently also benefit a lot from how different technology softwares are able to use AI to improve accessibility and universal design, which of course benefit persons with disabilities a lot, but also the rest of us as well. So previously in the old days, we manually input those old text to describe the content. But nowadays with AI built in the softwares we use to produce this content, the way it describes the content and images are even more rich and vivid than what we could possibly do by ourselves. That's one of the very important improvements, and it happened only recently.
Thank you, Tingting. That's fascinating. How is ESCAP working to set up a framework where disability inclusive business can be understood and undertaken?
We have facilitated the regional framework, Asia Pacific Decades of Persons with Disabilities, and under that, there are different priorities. Disability inclusion in the business sector is one of them. Apart from facilitating the implementation of such a regional framework, we also have done a series of knowledge projects to unpack what we mean by disability inclusion in the business world. We've done in the past few years designated publications on topics including accessibility, disability inclusive employment, procurement, which is basically how the government and private businesses can procure from producers and entrepreneurs, business owned by persons with disabilities, and also to unpack what exactly we mean by disability inclusive business value chain. Basically, we want to promote the idea beyond employment. Persons with disabilities are not only workers in the workforce, they can also be business owners, business leaders. They should definitely be represented in the board of directors, for example, not just for the human rights principle. It's because it will make business better and stronger, as Haibin has shared before. And also in many countries, they have increasingly become suppliers and distributors to the business sector. Very importantly, I think
company who provide sign language services to companies. I find that it's smart, it's remarkable. What they do is they will provide devices for the managers. So as soon as they find that they have an employee with hearing impair needs sign language, they can touch the button, and in the back they have an office that provide 24 hours sign language services, and the company buy the package. After they touch the button, then they will provide real-time sign language service.
Both of you, thank you for your fascinating insights. Before we wrap up, what would you like our listeners to take away from today's conversation?
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to talk with Tingting, you, and Kavita. It's really nice to talk about something I really passionate about. I have seen an emerging business awareness that the ESG, the environment, social governance issues are really related to the inclusion issue, especially people with disability. So this is something I really suggest our listeners, audiences to pay attention to. And this is an investment trend for business in the future. And also I find that in the supply chain, there are more well-recognized global brands. They are thinking about make their supply chain more inclusive. As Tingting mentioned, entrepreneur with disability, they can be part of the inclusive procurement process.
I would like to invite everyone to check out ESCAP's Disability at a Glance publication, especially the latest issue from 2023. It's called Catalyst of Change, Disability Inclusion in Business in Asia and the Pacific. It's available on the ESCAP's official website. I would also like to encourage everyone to learn more about persons with disabilities and disability inclusion in your daily life. If we all are aware and demand for inclusive products and services, it will certainly move the needle in the business world.
Well, thank you both for that. And it was certainly a very interesting conversation that I think we came up with a lot of solutions, but also an understanding of the challenges that's being faced. So that's all for today's episode of A Region of Solutions. Once again, a big thank you to our guests, Tingting and Haibin, for sharing their expertise with us.
Don't forget to follow us on social media and subscribe to our podcast for more inspiring stories from ESCAP, because we will be back.
Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and be part of the solution for our region. Goodbye.